Well, hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, and I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us here for Happy Hour with Dr. T. We gather here 2 nights a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays that we can chat for a few minutes, discuss a verse or two from the Word of God, then pray together. You know, Tuesday nights, for those who've been following me for a long time, Tuesday night is guest night, where we invite a special guest to join us to share their wisdom and to lead us in prayer. So tonight is a special returning guest, Doug Van Dorn. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the growing movement across the internet and some insights into this Black Jesus theory. So you won't want to miss this. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Zeolite is a detox spray. We work specifically with a company called Touchstone Essentials. They are an incredible company. We've been working with them now for several years. And zeolite is a mineral that goes through your body like a one-way basket. It will clean out heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury, aluminum, cadmium, and it hooks onto those metals from a one-way perspective. So once it's bound, it goes out through your urine or your stools and doesn't get redeposited in other places. Everybody needs to have a detox product in their life, and this one is so easy to use and it's so safe. You can take it when you're pregnant, you can take it when you're nursing, you can give it to little children, you can even give it to infants, and quite frankly, I give it to my dog. I actually put a little bit of the zeolite in his water because until we all stop living in a toxic world, we all need to get some of those extra toxicities out. The heavy metals, the persistent organic pollutants, the things that are floating through the air, the different things that we come in touch with in our environment. And we are a big fan of zeolite from Touchstone Essentials. We've been a big fan of their products for several years. Go to drtenpenny.com/detox to get your first bottle of zeolite spray for $50 off. Well, welcome back, everyone. Douglas Van Dorn is a pastor and a master of divinity from the Denver seminary. He was pastored from the Reformed Baptist. He's a pastor of Reformed Baptist Church in Northern Colorado since 2012. He helped start the Reformed Baptist Network and has served on the boards of 2 associated churches. Doug is a co-founder of several radio shows and podcasts. He's currently the host of the Iron and the Myth podcast. Are you guys still doing that, by the way?
Yeah, we're still doing that. We've done about 30 of them. Yeah.
Okay, great. On a personal note, Doug Van Dorn has been married since 1994. He has 4 girls. He's an avid outsider. He's climbed all 54 of Colorado's 14,000 plus peaks. He's also climbed Mount Rainier and Washington and Mount Shasta in California. He's also an avid golfer and a bicyclist. And I just learned he takes guitar lessons every week from someone who's a fan of ours and said hello. So he's also a musician on top of being an outdoorsman.
Not much of a musician, no.
Not yet. Well, welcome back, Doug. Thank you so much for coming and being with us tonight.
Thanks, Sherri.
Yeah, so I've watched a few of these. I read your podcast, or not your blog post, and this really caught my attention about the Black Jesus movement. I've watched a few of their videos, especially the ones about the frescoes in Russia. Their premise seemed a little bit interesting to me, but I just didn't, I didn't dig down into it far enough to know what was going on, but somehow things just didn't seem really right with their theory. How did you get an interest in this topic? And let's talk about a little bit about the Black Jesus movement.
Well, it was actually through a conversation I was having with your assistant on Telegram. She had sent me
Oh, wow.
she had sent me a little video of I guess it was a Black Jesus thing, but I had, I know a couple of people that have been involved in that, and it's troubled me quite a bit, because I mean, there's reasons to believe that Jews went down into Africa, into Ethiopia. They migrated down there. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem that with some Jews might have even been black. But the whole point that Jesus is some sort of a black African or something like that, it's just it's rather odd to me. But the thing that really caught my attention was what they were trying to do with the name of Jesus in this particular thing. And this is what I've been kind of fascinated by. But I don't know if you've run across this, but I hear people all the time calling Jesus, Yeshua. It's like they don't want to say the name Jesus as if it's some sort of a bad thing. In fact, this video talked about that, how Jesus is it's some sort of a Roman conspiracy during the days of Constantine, that they called him Jesus Christ and this wasn't his name. And I mean, I've heard some things that are just loony toony, like Jesus is actually the name Zeus. So Ya-Zeus or something like that, and they're trying to in the name smuggle in pagan god worship, and so people treat this name like the only way that you could ever possibly say um, the Lord's name is Yeshua. And so I actually used it as a reason to go and take a little bit of a deep dive on the name, where we get the name Jesus from, why this stuff is what my late friend Michael Heiser called paleo babble.
Mm. Oh, wow.
A great word that he called for his blog that he had. All these people that say things about the old world that are just nonsensical. They just don't know what they're talking about. I mean, I don't know how more blunt you can say it than that. So, um, if you're interested, we could look at the name Jesus. They asked for a little verse, you know, for the show that they could put up as a kind of a tag verse, and I said, well, I think the Matthew 1:21 would be really good. You know, where the angel comes to Mary and says, "You shall name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." And you know that verse comes to us in Greek in Matthew's gospel. So Matthew wrote that in Greek, and the word there that we have is Jesus. That's the Greek word. And notice that it says that you shall save his people from their sins. So in other words, Jesus is somehow related to the word to save. So we know that the Old Testament version of Jesus is Joshua. So Joshua is actually a Hebrew word, and Jesus is Greek, but how they come to be related to one another is kind of tricky. So, and this is where I thought, this is really interesting. So Joshua is, of course, the English word for the name. Jesus is the English word for the name. Um, you'll hear people say that his name isn't Jesus, and it's like, yeah, that's right. That's the English way of pronouncing his name, and it comes through various language filters to come down to us in our English tongue. So, you know, I was watching another video today where the guy goes, you know, if you would have gone up to Jesus and said, "Hey, Jesus," in the first century, he would have not known what you were talking about. That's true because it's English. But if you would have gone up to him and said, "Good morning," he wouldn't have known what you were talking about either, because good morning is English, right? He doesn't speak English. So, I mean, I just don't even understand what goes through some people's heads. But anyway, the Joshua thing, so his name is actually Yehoshua, and it comes from two words. One is Yah. Yah is short for Yahweh or Jehovah, and so that's the name of God. And then it comes from another word which means to save. So Joshua means that Yah saves, or the Lord saves. So it's so interesting. In this video that Michelle sent me, it was it said something along the lines of how names never change. A name is a name is a name, no matter what. I'm like, well, that's just not true. Even the name Joshua isn't the same. English Joshua was Yehoshua. That's not the same thing. And even in Hebrew, once you come to after the Babylonian exile, they actually drop off the ho, so it becomes Yeshua, which is what people want to say today. So if they actually wanted to be technical, they would say something more like Yehoshua instead of Yeshua. But languages change, words change even within languages. And so how you get to Jesus is really kind of interesting. So you've got the J and the O and the SH and the UA in Joshua, and then it's, you know, some kind of equivalent in Hebrew. So this word in Hebrew, there was no equivalent Greek letter for the SH sound from the letter Sheen. And so they did their closest approximation, which is to use the letter S. So now
Mm.
you've got sh moving to s, okay? And then you've got the ending of which is actually a guttural letter called ayin, which you say in the back of the throat. And it's actually written as a comma instead of just like a letter A or something. There is no equivalent to the letter A in the Hebrew written alphabet. So the scribes, the Masoretic Hebrew scribes writing about 1000 AD, because people had started losing how to speak Hebrew, they just really clever means of not tampering with the text, but putting in vowels in the forms of little markers that would go under the letters or sometimes inside the letters or whatever. And this is where we end up getting the sound from Joshua to help the people in 1000 AD learn how to pronounce the ayin. But originally that wasn't there. So it would really been more like Joshua. Okay. Now that's important because when you come over to the Greek and the Latin, you get the word Yesu. Instead of Jesus, you get Yesu. Well, why is that? It's because they're giving the closest approximation that they can to this word in their own letters, and their letters are not the same in Hebrew or Greek or Latin.
And
I
it's
don't know if you
really just,
saw.
it's
Do you
really
remember
true.
the Indiana Jones movie where the third movie where he has to cross over the letters of the bridge in order to get to the Holy Grail? And so his dad's sitting there saying, "You got to say the name of the Lord, and the name is Jehovah." And so he goes, "It's Jehovah." And so he steps on the J and he falls right through because, oh no, there is no J in Latin. Early Latin is written with I. So here you have an explanation for the I and the Y and the J. They're all kind of morphing together so that you don't get the J sound until you get really to kind of late Middle English, early modern English with the kind of um, the second version of the King James Bible, where you finally get the J. Even in the first translation or the first printed copy of the King James, it's still spelled with an I, Yesu.
Hmm.
So this just this weird morphology. And one more thing, and then you can stop me and say whatever you want. But I think this one's really interesting. So Middle English, that one of the things the guy said is he goes, you don't even find the word Jesus in English until about 1500. That's not quite true. You find it going back to about 1200. Found a really fascinating academic article on this from a guy who's talking about a couple of the early medieval Middle English and early English church fathers, one named Bede, and they actually called Jesus by this word Hayland. Now, I never had heard that. You've probably never heard this.
Mm-mm.
Hayland, what does that mean? So that word means to save. That was the
Hmm.
Middle English word to save. And what they were doing was they knew that the Latin translation and the Greek had used either Jesus or Yehu, but they knew that their people didn't speak Latin or Greek, and so they wouldn't have understood what it meant. So what they did is they took a word from Middle English that meant to save, and they basically turned it into a proper name. So Hayland was a common word that meant to save, and they just started calling Jesus by this word so that the
Hmm.
people could understand that his name means to save, which is what that verse goes back to. So what happened was at some point in time, 300 or 400 years after they started using Hayland, some of the commentators started interchanging Jesus with that word. And then, it eventually came as they started interacting more with the Latin manuscript of the Vulgate and stuff like that, that they just started more naturally using Jesu or Yesu. And then just the S, as a matter of the way English works, was added on, and you get Jesus. There's nothing magical about it. It's the way language works. It's the best approximation that they could give in the letters that they had to what Joshua was. There's no evil conspiracy to try and paganize the name. Um, it, 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 this is what Jesus is. When we call upon Jesus, we're saying his name. If you want to say Yeshua, that's fine. That's the Hebrew. If you want to say Jesus, that's fine. That's the Greek. If you want to say Yesu, that's the Latin. If you want to say Jesus, that's the English. It's all the same
It's
thing.
all the same person, the same
It's
entity, the
all
same
the
everything.
same thing.
What's interesting about that is that, and the listener may not know this, is that Hebrew doesn't have any vowels. And so,
Right. No
it's
written vowels. That's right. It's all
no written,
consonants.
it's all consonants. So what you were saying about how they would put the little added little things, in beneath the letters, and so that they would be able to pronounce it and make sense of it while they were reading it, because there's no vowels. So it has to change. It would have to morph in order to, and then here's another example of how it would have to change. Um, what about if when it changes from um Greek and Latin to Spanish and Russian
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
Thai? And what about Thai, the Thai language in Hindi, that has all the little curly cues, and the Malaysian
Exactly.
language? I mean, it has to change.
Yeah, I was watching a video. He goes, If you don't have any better reason than to say Jesus, than what I've told you about the explanation of where it came from, just go up to somebody and ask them if they heard of." And then he gave the Russian name for Jesus, which I had never heard. I couldn't even tell you what it is right now. And ask them if they've ever heard of him. And they'll be like, "Nope." But have you ever heard of Jesus? Well, yeah, I've heard of Jesus. And so, everybody knows who Jesus is. They all say his name is a curse word. The only name out there that anybody uses is a curse word.
That's a good
Wonder
point.
why that might be.
That's an
Uh,
interesting point.
so yeah, I thought that was a pretty neat point. Go up to him and say, "Hey, you ever heard of Hayland?" They'll say, "Nope." Well, that's who Jesus was in Middle English, but it changed.
Well, that's interesting. And like, I'll say, like, even my name, my last name, Tenpenny, everybody thinks it's American Indian, or isn't it a good British proper English name? Actually, it was Zaynfinnick. It was which is Tenpenny in German. So when my grandfather came over from Germany, and his last name was Zaynfinnick, spelled Zehnpfennig,
Oh
people
yeah.
in people could normally say that, and they couldn't say that in
So he
English.
just he just turned it into English.
So they did that at Ellis Island. They just anglicized it,
Yeah,
and because Zahnpfennig means tenpenny in German.
exactly.
So, but Zehnpfennig is nowhere close to Tenpenny. So
Right.
to say that names never change, they do change. They get, and when you're talking hundreds, if not thousands of years of difference, that's a pretty thin argument, I believe.
Very thin. He actually brought up in the video that she shared with me Moses. And I thought, well, even Moses has changed. His name was uh Moshe. That's the word in Hebrew, and we get Moses. That's not the same thing. And in Greek, it's something like Mosius or something like that. So all three of those, there's slight differences, but it's actually working very similar to what Jesus and Joshua are doing. So I mean, I just don't know where people come up with these things. They just make them up, and it's troubling to me because a lot of people buy into this kind of nonsense. And I don't know if it's become superstitious, or they feel like they don't want to take part in
Offend anybody.
paganizing of the name or something like that. But it's just, there's no reason to think those kinds of things. If we know our history and we know how languages work, that it's a pretty simple thing to solve.
I'm not exactly sure how I stumbled across this. We go through so many things that we read and we look at, and we skip from video to video when we're online, that we only listen to a little part of it. But somehow I had stumbled across a fairly lengthy video about this Black Jesus movement, and I watched a fair amount of it. I think it was because it had something to do with Vladimir Putin, and I find a very interesting character, and I've followed him for years, in the different things that he does, and how he was releasing all of these Russian icons that had been stored away, and he was releasing them and putting them into very prominent places. And these all of these icons. Now, just for the listener, what an icon is, it's like an effigy, it's like a painting of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. It's an effigy sort of thing that they release, and they are these things called either triptychs, which they open into thirds, or
Hmm.
they open into five sections.
Panels,
And
right?
Yes, and if you've seen them, if you've traveled in Europe and you've gone to any of the million different churches that you can go to over there, you usually see them, or you see them for the Middle Ages in art museums, that you'll see them. They're opened up and they're painted on wood. And they have all of these Russian ones by this one Russian, I think it was just one Russian artist. And all of these pictures of Mary and Jesus and of Joseph, they're all dark skinned. They're not black, but they're
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
painted black. They're painted in sort of an olive skin color.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that was the whole focus of this video, was saying that if you look at that and then you look at the modern day paintings of even through the 15 and 1600s of Jesus and Mary, that they're very, very white skinned. I mean, like almost like my sweatshirt.
Yeah.
They're very, very white skinned. And so this was part of the argument of saying, see, Jesus was always black. And it wasn't until we came along and became very racist that we changed this over to make Jesus be a white person. And I felt like there was there may be a little bit of truth in that, in terms of he was from the Middle East, and people
Mm-hmm.
in the Middle Eastern tend to have more olive skin. And some of them are a little bit more dark than others. They're not black like the Congo black people would be, that are very dark skinned, but they have more of an olive skin. And so I found that argument really pretty compelling, but it didn't make sense to me for what they were pushing, that the fact that this was a black Jesus, therefore he was there to save the black people, was the he was going to save the black people, but not the white people, was the tone of the video I was watching.
Very interesting. There was a Life magazine that came out 30 years ago and had a cover of all these icons of Jesus on it from almost every nation you can imagine. And of course, Jesus, then, if it's an icon in China, he looks Chinese. If it's one from Scandinavia, he looks like a
Interesting.
Swede. If he's from Africa, he looks black. And I always use that as a teaching lesson, that we're not supposed to make God in our image. And so I kind of agree with you. Whenever I see a white Jesus, the kind of the stereotypical hippie white Jesus thing that we see, like it bothers me. It bothers me just as much as seeing somebody try and paint Jesus as dark skinned as could possibly be, because that's not what he was. He was a real historical person who lived in the Middle East, in Israel, in Jerusalem in the first century. He looked like those people would have looked. Now we could debate how those people looked. And if you're gonna try and make an argument that they were all um, super black, dark skinned, I mean, I would listen to you. The people who are all there today may not be the same as what they were 2,000 years ago. I'll listen to your argument. Um, it's going to take a lot to convince me that the people who are telling us that they're Jews today aren't actually Jews. There's a lot of that stuff going on out there too, and the Khazarian stuff with the Jews, and they're actually coming from southern the areas of Georgia and whatever. And I mean, just it's the whole thing is just really strange, really bizarre. And I think that there's probably racist stuff going on a lot of different sides of this. And one of the things, I'm sure you feel this way too. It bothers me when I'm told, as because I'm a white male in the United States, that I'm by definition racist. And when somebody who's of another skin tells me that I'm racist, and then they tell me by definition they can't be racist because they're a minority. It's just Marxism, just dressed in modern social justice garb. And I really got the feeling that this was a pretty racist thing that was going on with this black Jesus thing, where they were using the name as one of their arguments to say, see, we can't trust history. And we know that Jesus was black. We know that his name wasn't this. And they were kind of lumping this all into this huge murky, soupy bowl of goo, to say that Jesus is, we can't trust anything that we have heard about who he was. But I'm here to tell you who he really was. It's like, give me a break.
Yeah, well, and I think that you said a little bit in your blog too about that they referred to him to being Zeus, like
Yeah.
Jesus,
Yeah.
which is like the Greek version of Baal and Moloch,
Exactly.
and so talk about that a little bit further.
So, Well, the Zeus thing is really interesting. Zeus was the lightning, heaven, sky god of the Greeks, and he was their high god. He becomes Jupiter, which, by the way, no J early on because there was no J. It was Jupiter. We just mentioned that with Jesus, Ya-Zeus. So that's even more name changing stuff. Um, but Zeus had a counterpart in the Middle East who was also the storm god, the lightning god, the heaven god, and his name was Baal or Baal in the Old Testament. So Baal had a mountain in Syria called Baal Zephon. And when the Greeks came and took over that area in the days of Alexander, they renamed it to Zeus Cassius, which basically means the exact same thing. But that shows you that they believed that Zeus and Baal are the same entity.
Wow.
So
Wow.
then you can make connections between Satan and Baal and Satan and Zeus. So, for example, when Jesus is accused by the Pharisees of casting out demons by Beelzebub, he uses in the very same sentence that you're saying, I'm casting out demons by Satan. So he's equating there Baal and Satan. And then there's another example in Revelation chapter 2, the church at Pergamum, where he goes, I know where you live, where Satan's throne is. And you're like, well, what is Satan's throne? Well, it turns out that there was this gigantic altar that the Nazis stole from Pergamum during World War One or two. I guess it would be two if it was the Nazis, but the Germans. It somehow made its way to Berlin Museum, and it was called the altar to Zeus. And so, and it was a throne. It's a giant throne. And so, when John is saying that you live where Satan's throne is, he's referring to Zeus's throne. In other words, he's equating Zeus with Satan. Jesus equates Zeus
Wow.
with Baal with Satan, and then we've just seen that Zeus is Baal. So in other words, they're all the same entity, um, same entity through just different cultures as they change the name of who they are, but they viewed them as the same thing. So when you're when you're going to accuse them of saying Jesus is actually Ya-Zeus or something like that, I mean, you don't get any more blasphemous than that. Not to mention ridiculous.
For sure. Well, hold that thought right there for just a second, Doug. We're speaking this evening with Doug Van Dorn, who's a returning guest. He did a whole series for us on the Giants. He released a new book after he did the Giants, after he did the Giants series. We're going to take a really quick break. We're going to come back with more for this evening. We'll be right back. There are an awful lot of people that are affiliates for Mike Lindell because we all really appreciate what he does for this country. We appreciate the hard work that he does, and we appreciate his products. He has more than 200 products in his store, everything from pillowcases and comforters to doggy beds and to wonderful slippers and bathrobes. There's something for everybody and something for everybody in each age group. I mean, one of the things that I really like a lot are the pillowcases, the children's Bible story pillowcases that I just think are such a great way when you tuck your child into bed at night to use these pillowcases that they come from his store to start to tell the story about Adam and Eve and Noah and the ark and different things. And they're colorful and they're really pretty. So from children all the way up to gentlemen that want to have like nice slippers, or to your dog, the doggy beds and things are just wonderful. So My Pillow is a great place to shop for just about anything that you want. And if you use our affiliate code DRT, that helps us, that can benefit us, that helps Mike Lindell, and you'll get a great product for anybody that you're shopping for. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you again for Doug for being here with us this evening on Happy Hour with Dr. T. You know, when I just mentioned, that we did the that whole series with the Giants, and then you said, "Wow, I've got a whole lot more material I need to talk about with your book, Giant Sons of Gods," and then it was a 10th anniversary edition that came out. How are things going with that book, and what new things would you like to bring out tonight?
Yeah, they're going okay. For whatever reason, I sold it as the same title except expanded and revised. 10th anniversary, I added that. So the first book still sells a lot. I wish that people didn't know about the first book and only could see the second book because I added I added probably 3 chapters or something worth of material to the new one that I thought would be helpful for people. Just stuff that I've learned along the way. One fun example was how there is a synagogue that recently discovered a giant mosaic, tile mosaic, in a city called Hukok up by the Sea of Galilee. And the mosaic had a giant picture of Samson. He was portrayed as a giant. And so it's like
Wow.
I wanted to add some stuff about that because what does that mean? Does that mean they thought that he was somehow a giant himself, or that he was somehow related to the Nephilim or something like that? And there's a little bit of that possibility, but it's probably more that they're playing on the idea of Nephilim because of Samson's strength and God giving him unusual powers through his hair and stuff like that. It was just a way of kind of portraying that, but they were using the motif of the Nephilim. So that was kind of just some fun information that I've learned along the way. And then I wanted to add a little bit more on some of the eschatology that I actually just finished a new book on Revelation that
Oh, wow.
has a little bit
Talk
of the
about
same
that a
kind of
little bit.
stuff in there that hopefully I'll be
Let's
releasing that as soon as we get a new cover. So it could be within a matter of days.
Yeah, well, this just for the listener, just so you know that this giant sons of gods that I tracked down, Doug, I tracked him down. I kept telling tracked him down for months, and then we found out we had the wrong phone number that we were trying to get hold of him from. Is one of my absolute favorite books. I mean, I've got books from everybody, and I mean, I've literally, and I'm not exaggerating when I say I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, even more than what you have in your library behind you. But I have not read all of them. I mean, I'll go on vacation and I'll come home and got by the blessings of people that they will send me books. I'll have 8 or 10 books. It's like, oh man, and that people will send me from different things. And I always say so many books, so little time,
Exactly.
to read all this sort of thing. So if you haven't read it, his new book, Giant Sons of Gods, if it has the same material in it as the first book, which I have mine dog-eared and tabbed and all sorts of things, and all of the genealogies and everything that you put together are just wizardry. They're just so good. If you're interested in the topic of the Nephilim and all of the things that happened with all of the giants during that day. So talk a little bit about what's coming out with your new book. I didn't know this. You didn't mention this to me before.
Yeah. Well, it was funny. I've been wanting to write it for a while. I preached through Revelation several years ago, and so I guess I was just inspired. I put it together probably in about 2 weeks.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
it's about
Wow.
200 pages, and
Oh
I had to
my
do a lot of
goodness.
editing and paring down of a bunch of sermons. And what I did is I broke it into 2 halves. So I take the first half and believe it or not, I use the movies Star Wars that George Lucas wrote because he does something that almost nobody knows that he's doing. Is he's structuring the first 6 movies in form of what they call a literary chiastic structure or a ring, so that the first movie that came out chronologically, Star Wars, the one that we called Star Wars, is matching up with the last movie, second movie with the fifth movie, third movie with the fourth movie. And you can actually see this scene by scene in the way that he films the thing. So you'll have a picture of like Anakin and his mother talking to him, looking over his shoulder. And then you'll see the very same scene, except it's Luke and it's Leia, and the picture's over the shoulder. So you've got this like a motherly figure with a father and a son. And like this happens throughout the movies on all kinds of crazy levels.
Wow.
You have a guy getting his hand chopped off at the beginning of movie 2, then his hand another person's hand chopped off at the end of movie 2, and then the same thing happens in movie 5 at the beginning and the end, a hand chopped off. He's just doing all these weird parallels in order to help tighten the way that he tells the story. So I had learned when I was preaching through Revelation that John is actually doing the same thing within Revelation. So the beginning of Revelation is pairing up with the end of Revelation, and it matches all the way to the very center of the book. Center of the book, in its literary form, is the story of Michael and the dragon, and Michael casting the dragon out of heaven and him being cast down to earth, and then Jesus conquering him. So it's not just Revelation though that he's doing this with. He's actually John wrote Revelation, and he also wrote the Gospel of John. And however this works, it's too far beyond my mind. But the first chapter of John matches with the first chapter of Revelation, second chapter to second chapter, goes
Oh,
all the way through to
wow.
the end of both books, and it works in reverse. So the end of John matches with the beginning of Revelation, and it goes all the way to the beginning of John and the end of Revelation. And John has a center, and believe it or not, it's the exact same center. It's Satan being cast out and judged, and Jesus being lifted up on the cross.
Oh my goodness.
So what I do is I try and help people see that Revelation is actually structured in a very different way than we're used to thinking about it. When we understand the structure, it can help us learn how to interpret the book. So that's the first half of the book, and then the second half of the book, I kind of use that central war of Michael and Satan and Jesus, at the cross, and I use it to go through the book and look at all the different supernatural things that are being discussed. In various different places, anywhere from the mark of the beast to the dragon to um, all kinds of really fun stuff that most people have never even heard of or thought about, that John is using to help tell this story of this war. And so there's really nothing else out there that I know of that's like it, and I'm kind of excited that it's going to be coming out.
Do you have at least a working title, or do you have a
Yeah, it's going to be
title?
called Rings of Revelation. Rings of
Ooh,
Revelation.
how cool is that? And it's planned to come out when?
Well, my buddy is working on the cover as we speak, and it will have a companion guide to it as well. So this will be full of all the charts and the outlines and the introductions to the chapters, and bibliographies where you can go to read the different viewpoints and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of a companion book to it that's meant to be read as a study guide, instead of as a book you sit down and read it as a book. So
Well, when you've actually got it in print and it's ready to fly off the shelf, please let us know, because we'd be happy to put that into our newsletter that goes out, and be able to to support that and promote that for you, because it sounds really fascinating. People are so focused on, Christian people are so focused on Revelation and end times, and where are we in the eschatology, and where are we, pre-trib, post-trib, blah blah blah. There's no such thing as tribulation. There's no such thing as the rapture. There is the
right.
rapture, and the rapture is going to happen this week. And so, because it's going to happen this week, I don't have to get involved. I don't have to do anything. And so, I'm just going to sit back and do nothing, because the rapture is going to take me out of here. And there's all this yada, 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 yada. So,
Hmm.
to have a different type of interpretation come along, that's got to be just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted something that would be objective, instead of how can I make this book be about me and what I read in the newspaper headline this morning. I wanted it to be, is there any kind of an objective way that we can come to this book and see if there's actual meaning that God would have for us that we can get out of it? And, because my take is whatever the Bible actually means, it's probably more important than what I hope that it means or what I wish that it means. And if I
Mm.
can understand and discern what it means, then I'm on the right track to what he would have for me in terms of reading the thing.
Well, this is going to be just fascinating. Absolutely just fascinating. I can't wait to get my hands on it. So you'll have to let us know, because it's certainly a topic that I'm very much interested in, because of the whole vaccine thing that happened with the COVID jab that we now know is a bioweapon. And everybody was asking me during that period of time, how does this, is this at the very beginning, they would say, is this the mark of the beast? And after
Right.
talking to a whole bunch of people, yourself included, and we had a lot of discussions. It's like, no, this is not the mark of the beast, but you're definitely being marked. And number one, and number two, you're getting conditioned to stand in line for something like this.
Yeah.
And what is you mentioned in your book that you talk a little bit about this whole mark of the beast thing. Where does that fall in what you just recently wrote about?
Well, some I take a view that Revelation is cyclical, and I get that from the nature of the literature itself, right? I mean, if it's chapters are pairing up with chapters, then reading it as one chapter follows the next chronologically may not necessarily be the way it was intended to be read. And so, in the history of interpretation on the mark of the beast, you actually find people talking about how this was actually fulfilled in the days of Nero. that Nero, and his name is 666, and the gematria of it. So you also find, of course, what you just said. You find people today talking about how it could refer to some sort of a future mark or whatever. Well, in a cyclical reading, you can actually have both of those things taking place because history repeats itself. And so you can have, like, I guess what you would call maybe types or something like that, where you have a kind of a mark like Nero, or the, I guess he wouldn't be the mark, he would be the Antichrist. Sorry, makes it confuse that with a mark, but it's the same kind of an idea, that you could have some kind of a mark that people were forcing the Christians in the first century to take, and if they didn't take it, then they'd be killed, and then that can repeat itself throughout history, and it can come to some sort of an ultimate final climax at the end of days. That's going to lead to the second coming or whatever. I don't have a problem saying that both of those things could be true simultaneously.
Ooh, that's really interesting. Because I recently just had a conversation with someone, a pastor in Hawaii when I was there, speaking at three different um, religious events, church events that I was speaking at. And he was talking about, this was news to me, about how it was really that the mark was really referring to the beast, who the beast was Nero, and that Nero was because that's what they would call him,
Right.
and that it really was, and we didn't have enough time to sort of explore it. It was like, okay, well, I can kind of get that, but what does that do for today?
Yeah,
What does that
yeah.
mean for now? You
So
know?
if there's multiple fulfillments of it, and we see multiple fulfillments of all kinds of prophecies, there were prophecies about Jesus coming that had some sort of an impact in the days when they were written. The one that comes to my mind is the prophecy of the virgin. So that was actually written, spoken. I think it was either to King Ahab or to King Ahaz or something like that, where Isaiah said, "You're going to have a son, and he's going to be assigned to you." Well, he's talking to that king, and so that would have had some kind of a bearing in his life 700 years before Jesus came along. But the New Testament comes along and says that its ultimate fulfillment is in the birth of Jesus, born of the Virgin from Mary. So if you can have that kind of a thing taking place at the first coming, why can't you have it taking place during church history and culminating in the second coming? And maybe I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too, and trying to bring all these different views together. But to me, it's the way that the literature is actually written that lends itself to me interpreting it this way, and which is why I spend all that time talking about the literary structure of the thing.
Well, I think it's really interesting, and I think that, the one book that stuck out in my mind for, oh gosh, when this book was written, probably back in the 80s, it was called The Case for Christ, and it was written by two
Lee,
guys
Lee Strobel.
I don't, I'm not sure. The thing that I remember about it was these guys were atheists,
Yeah,
and
I
they,
think that's who it was. He was
yeah,
a like a reporter or something like that,
yes,
and
yes.
ended up becoming a Christian.
Yes, because he was absolutely out to prove that the Bible was hogwash, and it was just a bunch of random things that were all put together, and it really didn't mean anything. And then he had done so much research and looking at all these different sequences of things that happened hundreds, if not thousands of years apart, and that they all fell in line on top of each other, and he became a Christian at the end of the book.
Hmm.
I remember that. Yeah. And it sounds like you're kind of doing the same thing with showing one more a different version of showing people that this is the book. This is the book that we need to listen to.
It is, and I mean, it's a book that's been written for Christians, of all time periods. So it had to apply as much to somebody living in 1000 AD as it applies to somebody living in 2000 AD and somebody living in 70 AD. And if not, then it's kind of like, well, why read this book if it's only talking about things that are going to take place in so far of a distant future that it isn't going to have any bearing in my life? And of course, Christians have always said that they are the generation, and we've seen people claiming this since the very beginning. But maybe there's a reason why they're doing that. Like I said, if history is repeating itself, and you can see kind of signs in earlier parts of history of what's going to culminate at the very end of days. we may be living at the very end of days, or we may not be living at the very end of days, but we can still see the application of the book, and especially in its salvific form, make a full ring cycle here, a full bringing back to the beginning that Jesus is the one who saves, and that's the purpose of Revelation in the first place. It's to focus our minds on the God who saves us and how He's done it, and it just happens to do it in some really fascinating ways that have captivated us for 2,000 years.
Yeah, well, that's the point. I mean, what other book has been around for 2000 years, has been the point of so much controversy, and has a centralized character called Jesus that is the only person that we use his name to swear with. We
Mm-hmm.
don't swear by, by Mark or John or Joe or or Sarah or anything like that. That was a really good point that you made. But has held our interest, has held our faith, has held our commitment for 2000 years. If it didn't have some sense of absolute truth to it, it would have been just like the other thousands and thousands of books that have been, millions of books really, that have been written and just clutter up libraries all across the world. Yeah, really a lot. Well, Doug, this has been a fascinating hour with you. I'm so grateful that you came on and joined us again here tonight. And I'm so excited about the Rings of Revelation that's going to be coming out here in a couple of days, a couple of weeks. Please let us know how we can help to support you in the release of that, and to further promote the Sons of God's, the 10th anniversary, Giant Sons of God's, the 10th anniversary revised edition, 'cause it's really good stuff. If you're interested in that stuff, if you're not interested in it, you should be, and you should get the book and you should read it because it's really super good.
I think
So,
the last two chapters of the new edition actually kind of talk a little bit about this Revelation stuff. So I didn't really have that in there, and I wanted to focus the book on the first coming, but I thought, yeah, it needs a little bit of second coming stuff with it. So I decided to add that. So maybe that's in some ways a seed of what ended up becoming the Revelation book too. So a
well,
little bit in
very,
both of those books are the same thing.
very good. I just am so amazed at people that, like you guys, that, I've gotten to know over the last couple of years, that are just such prolific writers, that you just write so much stuff. It's a real gift to be able to do that. It's not something that we can, and even though I like to write and I write my Substacks, and I've, just published a new book. My book that just came out is called Walking with God. It's I need to keep a copy of it down here. It's
Yeah,
just
so you can
it's
hold it up for people.
yeah, I should. It's really, because it's really pretty, and it's a really nice little book. It's a book of inspirations, so that you can go through the table of contents, and on days that you need an inspiration about something, if you're discouraged or you need to be lifted up, it's about 3 pages. It's just a short little read with a verse at the beginning, a little discussion about the verse, and then a prayer. So it's just a way to lift people up. And so we worked on that endlessly. And it's just one little book. Like you and L.A. Marzulli and Mike Spalding. Oh my goodness, Mike Spalding and Pastor Michael Lake. I mean, you guys just write and write and write and write. It's just amazing. And it's just a real blessing. It's a real gift. And thank you for giving your gift to the world. That's really wonderful.
Well, you're welcome.
So, with that, I'd like to close out with our talk here tonight. Would you like to lead us in a word of prayer as we close?
Oh, absolutely. Heavenly Father, it's always fun to be on Happy Hour. Thank you for Dr. Tenpenny and how you have helped her since her stroke, and how she's doing so well now. And but yet it's changed her life, and she has to think about it, constantly. And that's a good thing that you bring those kinds of things into our life. It helps us realize and remember that we're mortal, and we've even talked a little bit about that today. We thank you for Jesus, and for you giving him your only begotten Son to us to save us from our sins, and to save us from your wrath, and to bring us into union with yourself and give us eternal life. And that's what it's all about, that these discussions that we have, and it's where our hearts lie, and we can't thank you enough for those things. And just pray that you would bless those who hear this program, and that you would draw them to yourself, and give them encouragement today in whatever they're going through. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And thank you so much. And before you go, tell people about the podcast that you're doing, since you guys are still doing that. I think it's really interesting. You and Derek and who is the other person? There's a third
Brian
person.
Godawa and
Yeah.
Judd Burton. We're doing a
Oh,
podcast called
how's Jed
yeah.
doing, by the way? He's
Well, he's
physically
he's trying to move out of the place that he's in and move in with his brother over closer to Dallas. He's recovering slowly. It's a very hard comeback, but he's doing well mentally, I think. So we're encouraged about that. The podcast is called Iron and Myth. We've done about 30 of them. You go to my website at douglasvandorn.com and you can find that and all the other websites I do, podcasts I do. And I actually started my own podcast called Giant Steps. We've done about 15 programs of that.
wow.
And yeah, so I've become the podcast guy, I guess. I don't know why. It's fun to do and be able to get some information out that I want to talk about. So
And that all of those are linked up at your website?
yeah, everything's on my website. There's a whole page for podcasts, whole page for the books, and yeah, you can go through that to get anything you want.
And tell people the name of the website again, please.
Just my name, douglasvandorn.com.
And it's DORN, so people can get that.
DORN, yep.
Yes, Douglas
Good
Van
Dutch
Dorn.
name. It used to be two O's, but now it's just one O.
See,
The
there's a
changing of
word
names,
changing
right?
of names. That's very good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for joining us here this evening. It's just been a delightful conversation about some enlightening things of things that people may be seeing out there on the internet about the Black Jesus. And we didn't go into it in huge detail, but we did a lot of things that maybe will spark your interest and you'll look into it a little bit deeper and you'll see where the real Jesus lives. So with that, I'm grateful and both honored to have you here with us tonight. And with that, I want to close with one of my favorite verses from the Bible that I close all my broadcasts with, whether they're live or pre-recorded, which is Romans 12:12. Rejoice in hope, be patient in trouble, and be persistent in prayer. So until we meet on the next broadcast, stay strong, stay in prayer, lean into God. He will never let you down. Join us on Thursday nights for this week. For the month of May, it's Happy Hour with Dr. T solo. And then we will start our special events again in June. So have a good evening, everyone. Good night and God bless.
In a time when truth is censored, one name stands out: Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, the relentless seeker of knowledge and defender of freedom. Explore groundbreaking findings at drtenpenny.com. Ignite your mind with riveting podcasts, explosive articles, research-driven Substacks, webinars, ebooks, and more. In an era plagued by environmental toxins and vaccine-related exposures, Dr. Tenpenny has expertly crafted a selection of safe detox protocols that facilitate profound healing at a cellular level. It's time to cleanse, rejuvenate, and restore your body's vitality. With heart damage on the rise, Dr. Tenpenny introduces nationwide ECP therapy to repair hearts and achieve optimal health. Seize the opportunity and embrace the wealth of resources, information, and health recommendations awaiting you at drtenpenny.com and become a Tenpenny Podcast member to join our mission in the quest for uncensored truth, the health of our nation, and medical freedom.